Hello, my name is Brayden, and I decided to do my presentation on Caernarfon Castle in northwestern Wales. Alright, so first I would like to dive into the background as for why this castle was built, along with the other castles within the Iron Ring. Um, Most of the historical castles in Wales was part of a large expedition that was led by King Edward I, who wanted to accomplish three main ideas. First, he sought out to consolidate England's power. By doing this, he believed that he would have greater control over the land as a true king. This would ultimately fall into the people that he led already in England. This would be the citizens that he already was ruling to basically say, here's what I'm going to do. Let me show you my power. Let me demonstrate and show you how great of a king I am. That was one of the main factors, along with uniting trade, along with uniting other materials and other relations. He just wanted England to be its own entity. He didn't want there to continue being this England and Wales. He wanted to consolidate it and be the ruler of that whole land. Next, he was influenced by the legacy of King Arthur and saw the idea of a united Britain. Um, King Arthur originally had this idea, and basically King Edward strongly supported it. He thought it would be great and super beneficial to him as a king. We know Edward was a big fan of King Arthur because not only did he adopt Arthurian symbols into his governance, but he also had the tomb of King Arthur open and the remains placed elsewhere. Not many people know why he did this. It's kind of a mystery. My guess is he just wanted to preserve it somewhere else. I don't know. Maybe trying to hint at us in the future of here's who I'm taking inspiration from. I don't know. Ultimately, this idea was a big topic of focus in Roger Loomis's journal article, Edward I, Arthurian Enthusiast, which I ended up reading. It was a pretty interesting read. It's basically going into Edward I's obsession with King Arthur. It's kind of strange, but also kind of cool. Um, and then lastly, King Edward I wanted to suppress the possibilities of future rebellions from the Welsh. Already, the Welsh had invaded England shortly before King Arthur goes to war against the Welsh people. Uh, but the Welsh had already invaded England before by David ap Griffith, who was Owain of Wales's brother. And this was essentially the last straw for King Edward, and at this point he was ready to act on the Welsh people. Also, here on the right, you can see what a 13th century Welsh bowman would look like. The artist of this specific one is unknown, but it looks to be from around the 13th or 14th century. So, as I mentioned, ultimately Edward I ends up invading Wales. Here on the left, you can see the path that he took. For the most part, he started up north and moved his way westwards towards the coast of Gwynedd County. Once he reached that, he moved south, finalizing his campaign. To ensure that the victory stayed for the future, he created what historians call that Iron Ring of Castles, or otherwise known as just the Ring of Iron. This was not a term that was used back then. This is just what a lot of historians call all these castles together because they all came up around the same time. Um, Ultimately, King Edward I ended up making these castles to really just show him who's boss, to be honest. Hey, you guys invaded my territory before. I am now invading you, and I'm winning. Like, that's essentially the mindset he had. And not only was he winning, but he's also like, I'm going to still always be invading you. I'm still always going to be here. Join us or die, essentially. Um, so yeah, on the right you can see the order in which the castles were built, um, along with that whole list up on top. You can see which one came first, second, third, etc. Caernarfon, the castle that I'm studying here, is number 7 in the list, which makes sense for the most part for the location. Um, but yeah. So then the aftermath of this, as you can tell from the map, that we just saw, it ultimately results in an English victory over the Welsh, which lasted until the Welsh Revolt in 1400. Edward II is crowned the Prince of Wales, and as mentioned, the Ring of Iron is created to ensure that England maintains control of the land. With that being said, Caernarfon begins construction in 1283, and also the Statute of Rhuddlan is established in 1284, which creates the legal framework of Wales following its conquest. This integrated the Welsh territories into the English governing system. This was just because Wales had a whole different system compared to England before. Now with these systems being integrated together, now it's more of a unity, more of what Edward I is trying to go for with this. And yeah, he basically just takes it over and rewrites the government for Wales, so that way it's just under English's rule. He doesn't want the Welsh people to suffer for the most part. It doesn't seem like it. He wanted them to basically be part of England. He wanted them to just almost accept defeat and just be okay with that. It's an interesting mindset to have, interesting take for Edward. But yeah. All right, so moving on to the castle itself. Ultimately, the castle's original plans are not around today, but here is a mapping of the castle's layout today by Alison Stones from the University of Pittsburgh. She is with the Medieval Caernarfon Project. It's quite interesting to see how the castle doesn't appear to follow any symmetrical pattern. This is likely intentional to give the whole structure an intimidating look, as Edward I wanted it to be. Again, he wanted to show the Welsh people he meant business. Do not mess with me. If you mess with me, suffer the consequences. Otherwise, you're welcome to join us, is essentially how he seemed to have been. But yeah. So in here is a couple of highlights on the castle's overall structure. Most recognizable is the Eagle Tower, which impressively had these little slits you can see on the sides of the turret towers that come off the main structure. There's 3 of them there. They call them turrets, but I don't think they really had like turrets in it. For the most part, it was archers. And basically these little slits, they were just little holes in the stone that you could fit your bow and arrow in, and that's it. You can kind of see through just a little bit just to be able to aim at your target, but other than that, those little slits is protecting your body from getting hit by any counterfire. Along with, you have the high ground advantage. It was really interesting to see, and it's really fascinating that we can still see that today because the structure is still up and intact. But yeah, the elevated position, as I said, would give them an advantage against any sort of castle sieges, which spoiler alert, that does happen later. So ultimately the castle is completed in 1330. There's no official mention of it being done per se, but after this year the castle isn't really mentioned in any financial records. Online in my research, I found that there was a lot of people that disputed if it was ever even done. Some people think that Edward wanted more done with it, but he couldn't get to it. He just didn't see the feasibility with it, if it was even worth it at that point. But anyway, given that the construction started in 1283, it took a total of 47 years to complete, and no wonder. The pictures I'm showing you right now does no justice in conveying how large this castle is. I mean, just look at the people in the images. They look tiny. It's almost like you're up on an airplane. Like, these are huge structures. And considering that they didn't have modern building techniques and stuff like we have now, they didn't have power machinery and all sorts of stuff like that. It must have been quite the operation to build these. Especially in a territory that wasn't even theirs. Like, I can't even fathom that. But yeah, aside from ensuring order in Wales, the castle has also served as a royal residence, notably housing Queen Eleanor of Castile in 1284, who gave birth to their son Edward of Caernarfon within these castle walls. not very sanitary, not advisable today, but it's 1284. What are you going to do? But yeah. So here is a little bit of a timeline of some events that happened after the medieval period, moving forward to today. Um, in 1403, Owain Glendower led a siege as part of the Welsh Revolt. He ultimately never made it into the castle. He got as far as outside, and then I don't recall if he ended up scouring away or what happened there, but he never made it within the castle walls. In 1642 through 1651, the castle was besieged 3 times due to the English Civil War. The outer walls ended up staying intact, though, which is pretty incredible because normally within the besiegement, the walls get smashed. But anyway, they ended up staying intact. And around this time, the castle even had an order to be destroyed, which I thought was pretty astonishing, along with the town walls. But since the outer walls remained and the order was never carried out, the castle's still here today for us to see and admire and really appreciate. On top of that, Edward VIII was historically invested as the Prince of Wales at the castle in 1911. And then Prince Charles was invested as Prince of Wales at the castle in 1969. So that's interesting that these more modern rulers, they still acknowledge the castle's existence, still acknowledging the history. It's really fascinating. We don't really get that here in America for the most part. I mean, there's the regular visit to like Arlington Cemetery, but you don't see like the presidents coming to Lexington to honor the original Americans that came here. It's interesting. All right. So now on to Caernarfon today. Today, Caernarfon is essentially a museum for tourists and has been retrofitted with railings and other facilities to make it more friendly for modern visitors. I'd imagine they added restrooms, stuff like that. I didn't look too far into it. But once again, in this picture, you can see how small the people are compared to the structure. It's truly a huge structure compared to the other castles built around this time period. I'm planning on possibly going to London and to Wales in the spring. Um, I'm not completely concrete on that yet, but if I end up going, I'm for sure going to check out this castle. It seems very, very interesting to me. It just seems huge. And again, we have nothing like this in New England. I've DJ'd weddings at castles, most notably Sears Castle in New Hampshire, and that's a legit castle, but it's nowhere near the size as what this is. It would be interesting to see. Anyway, with that being said, that concludes my presentation. Here is a view of a more modern day, the western view of the castle during low tide. Um, but yeah, it overall it's a really interesting castle, and I hope to visit it at some point in my future. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something new and interesting. And that is it.